Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my November 2018 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with the nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. I don't have a chart for this fact, but this month I surpassed 200 books read this year. So I've already read more books this year than the 201 I read last year, which just boggles my mind. In November I read 25 books for a total of 5,792 pages. This takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 2,260 of those pages were actually about 71 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 15 adult books, 8 YA books, and 2 middle grade books. I read 11 novels, 13 graphic novels, one of those being an omnibus, and 1 short story. This month I read mostly fantasy in part because of all of those graphic novels, as well as some non-fiction, historical fiction, and speculative fiction. If you adjust by page count, spec fic goes up a bit and fantasy decreases again because of the number of graphic novels. Most of these books, no surprise, came from the library, but I also read 1 ARC. I read 11 paperbacks, 6 hardcovers, 6 audiobooks, and 1 ebook. Nearly half of my books were in the 100 to 199 page range because graphic novels, and the vast majority were published in the last decade. Most of these books were by female authors, although I did read a few male authors, a non-binary author, and some comics with both male and female authors. Most of the protagonists were female, with a few male protagonists, some ensemble casts, 1 non-binary, and some books without protagonists. In terms of setting, almost half of these books were set in the States, with others being set in other worlds: Japan, Mexico, France, Ireland, and the United Kingdom. I've been to 4 of those countries. In terms of diversity, we have some reads including race, own voices representation, queer content, and feminist reads, but a large selection of them had no diversity to speak of. In terms of star ratings, this month I read 2 3-star books, 3 3.5-star books, 13 4-star books, 5 4.5-star books, and 2 5-star books. Let's start with the lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? My ordering in this video is going to be a little bit weird because a lot of the graphic novels I read were in series, and I don't want to talk about, say, the 3rd one when I talk about my 3 stars, but then all of the other ones when I talk about my 4 stars. So basically I'm going to lump all of the comics together in the star rating that most of them are in. For 3-star books we have V for Vendetta. This is one of those books that I feel like is better as a movie. Although to be fair, I haven't watched the movie since it came out. It's much to do with the style of this comic book and the fact that I'm pretty sure they intended all of the government figures to look the same, but because of that, I often had no idea who was on the page, who was talking to who. There's a subplot where somebody is sleeping with somebody else's wife and I couldn't tell you whose wife it was or anything. Basically, unless the character was V, Evie, one of the 2 other women, or the one character that spoke in a Scottish vernacular, I had no idea who it was. For the most part. Sometimes I could figure it out, but it took some guessing sometimes. Those gripes aside, this story was fine, but it didn't really grip me. One of my 3.5-star reads early in the month, I read The Haunted Mansion by Joshua Williamson. This is a middle grade graphic novel about the Haunted Mansion. It's a story of this boy who is full of fears and his grandfather who is an adventurer, and the boy ends up having to save the grandfather. It was fun, I really enjoyed the art. Again, it's just not something that knocked my socks off. I just really like The Haunted Mansion, as you'll see later in this wrap-up because I read more Haunted Mansion stuff. This month I also read City of Light, City of Poison. This was me low-key participating in nonfiction November, even though I wasn't really participating because I was taking a break, because I was burning out on readathons, and obviously I'm hosting my own readathon and coming back with a vengeance and trying to read 12 books. It's not gonna happen, but I'm gonna try. And if you somehow missed that, I will link that TBR in places. Anyway, this book is about 17th century France, and I thought it was mostly going to be about the first police chief in Paris, and a little bit of it was, but a lot of this book had more so to do with whichever Henry was on the throne at the time and who he happened to be sleeping with at the time. And then a ton of people throughout Paris who were just poisoning each other. This period of time actually got the nickname of the Affair of Poisons because about 400 people were put on trial or at least arrested for being connected to poisonings in some way. I can appreciate how much research went into this, but it didn't really grip me like I thought it was going to. In addition, there were just too many nobles mentioned and I really couldn't keep track of who Henry was sleeping with at one time and why I should bother to know this information. Moving on to some 4-star reads. Before we get into the epic amount of graphic novels I have to talk about, let's talk about A Quick and Easy Guide to They Them Pronouns. This is exactly what it sounds like. This is the arc that I read this month. This book is written from a non-binary perspective as well as a cis perspective because it is meant to teach people that don't know about they them pronouns, but then also it's a little bit of what to do when people don't understand your pronouns. I felt it was a pretty great guide. It was done in kind of a comic type format. There was lots of information, and I think that based basically every company should have this book on hand to refer to. Next, let's talk about Goldie Vance volumes 2, 3, and 4. Now, to be fair, I gave volume 2 a 3.5 star, but the rest of them were 4 stars. That's why we're talking about them in the 4-star time. This series takes place in 1970s Florida in a hotel where Goldie Vance is not only a person who parks people's cars, aka a valet, I just couldn't think of the word right then, she is also a detective. She also has a really cute girlfriend, an awesome dad, a mom who works as a mermaid, and her best friend is just so smart. Obviously, each of these different volumes followed a different case. I just didn't like the one in number 2 as much as I liked the ones in 3 and 4. I also erroneously thought that my library just didn't have the 5th volume, but it turns out the 5th volume isn't out yet, so I have to wait like everybody else. This comic ends up being about love and friendship and dating and relationships, and I just really enjoyed it. Next, let's talk about Faith, volumes 1, 2, and 3. Volumes 1 and 2 I gave 4 stars to, volume 3 I gave 3 stars to. It was still good, but there was just this deviation in it that I didn't really enjoy. I know exactly why it was there, but eh. Faith is basically my new favorite superhero. She's fat, she flies, and she is such a nerd. She spews a ton of pop culture references, and when she feels the need to swear, she says frack, goram, or exclamations from other nerdy science fiction franchises. This is the type of comic that likes to make fun of its own format. Because Faith grew up on superheroes and sci-fi and that type of thing, she knows about these tropes that often appear in superheroes and sci-fi, and she calls them out, and it's a lot of fun. For example, at one point there are 2 of her, and both of her are like, "You're the evil clone!" And then they realize that neither one of them is the evil one, and they're both very confused. On to more superheroes. I read Wayward's volume 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I gave all of them 4 stars. This series starts out with a girl named Rory Lane who grew up in Ireland, but her mom is Japanese and her parents have divorced, so she has moved to Japan to go to school there. Shortly after arriving, she realizes that she has some superpowers. And then she keeps making friends with more people that have superpowers. The elevator pitch for this one is Buffy in Japan, and I like it. There are lots of ghoulies. There haven't been any vampires yet, but you never know. It's fast-paced. The superpowers that these different teenagers have are fascinating, and I'm really interested to see how the series goes from here because there was just a big twist in the 4th issue and we're in a completely different place. So yeah, if you want something weird and fast-paced, try the Wayward series. This month I also listened to The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This is a non-fiction book again, and I actually read this for my local book club. I went into this thinking it was going to make me extremely angry because I knew it was about a woman whose cells have been used for research since her death. Since before her death even, and she died in, I think it was 1952, somewhere in the 50s. And her cells still exist and are still used in labs today. But I got more of an understanding of her cells weren't taken maliciously, they were taken from basically all the patients that came in with that type of cancer. There was really no such basis for informed medical consent back then, and although that is terrible and some of the practices from back then are absolutely horrifying by today's standards, it was a different time and different ethics. So although if something similar happened nowadays, I would be outraged, I understand it a little more, if that makes any sense. This book did a deep dive into the background of this woman, Henrietta, and then also talked extensively about her family that is still living, or at least was still living when she was researching. I really enjoyed the human interest life story aspect of it. This month I also read I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. This one centers around a girl named Julia whose older sister has recently passed away. And the crux of this book is the family dynamic and people not understanding each other. It also does a deep dive into her mental health issues, which I was not exactly prepared for, but honestly should have seen coming. Julia is an introvert in a family where that is not a thing they understand, which is strange because her parents don't want her to go out and have friends, but they do want her to come to all the family gatherings and talk to every single person she might possibly be related to, when she would rather just be sitting alone with a book, which I can relate. This one looks at generational interests. It has a mystery aspect when it comes to her sister and the double life she might have been leading, and I really enjoyed listening to this one. Another book I read this month was City of Ghosts. This one I mostly picked up because the majority of it is set in Edinburgh, which is my favorite city on the planet. About a year previous to the start of this novel, Cassidy almost died and was saved by a ghost. So now her best friend is that ghost because he's still following her around. Since her near-death experience, she can go beyond the veil, which is see things in this ghosty world. And this really only happens when there are spirits in the place that she's in, so she's very much looking forward to going to the coast where it is very isolated and there are not a lot of spirits hanging around, so she can just hang out and read books. However, she finds out that's not how her summer is going to go because her parents are taking her to Edinburgh. Her parents, by the way, write books about ghosts, but that doesn't mean that they understand what she's going through. Additionally, Edinburgh is not a place free of ghosts. It's actually very well known for being haunted, so obviously some mischief goes down. This book very much sets itself up to be the first in what could be a very long series, and I would be fascinated to find out if one of the places that they visit in a future book is my city, because it is also pretty well known for being haunted. Speaking of hauntings and murders, that's as good a segue as I'm going to get into His Bloody Project, which is a book that, as you're beginning to read it, it seems like it's meant to be non-fiction, but it is in fact fiction. I checked. This book is about a trio of murders that happened in 1869 in a very small town in Scotland, and it is presented in a series of documents. The first document is meant to be written by the murderer, and it's basically his whole life story and what led up to the murders. And then after that we have court transcripts and excerpts from newspapers. I figured pretty early into this that it probably wasn't actually nonfiction because there was a narrative structure to it, whereas if you were told to sit down and just write about what you did with your crimes, you probably wouldn't start at your parents' meeting, but that's what this does. However, I made sure to not actually research this until after I'd finished listening to it, and it was a lot of fun to go back and forth with maybe this was actually a thing, nah, it probably wasn't actually a thing, maybe it was, maybe it's based on events, I don't know. If you like your narrative nonfiction, you'll probably enjoy this even though it ends up being fiction. On to my 4.5 star reads. This is where I'm going to talk about the 6 single issues of the Haunted Mansion comic I read from the early 2000s. My best friend realized that that's my favorite attraction, and she had these single editions because she really likes one of the artists that's in them, and she lent them to me and they were delightful. Each issue is filled with different stories about the Haunted Mansion, and then there was one continual story throughout all of these 6 issues, so it came in 6 parts. I just enjoyed seeing all the different art styles and the different portrayals of the Haunted Mansion. This month I also read When the Moon Was Ours. This is magical realism about a girl who grows roses out of her wrist and a trans boy whose community does not know that he is trans. There are bullying elements in this, there are elements of people just not talking to each other, which can be frustrating, but you can see why they're doing it. And then there is also a love story. The story is also told with a lot of visual elements to it, mainly talking about different hues of colors. Over and over, different hair colors are described and described again. The colors of common objects are also integral to the storyline. And this has a very flowing narrative, so there are points where I'll have read through a paragraph and thought I missed something because it goes from one point to another quite quickly. This month I also listened to An Unkindness of Magicians, which is giving me Night Circus vibes, except for there's way more families vying for this prize. Basically every 10 to 20 years there is a tournament to see who will continue to be the leading house in the magic realm. And although some of the houses are knocked out quite early in the easier challenges near the end tend to be fatal. What I really enjoyed about this one is the descriptions of the different type of magic and illusions that were taking place. I also enjoyed the slight nods to other tales of magic. For example, one of the houses is House Merlin, and one of the characters is Miranda Prospero. Speaking of magic, we might as well lead right into Something Borrowed by Paul Magers. This one is actually the second in a series, and I didn't realize that when I picked it up, but it was very good at filling the reader in on what you should know from the first book. When I first picked this up, I thought it was just about 2 little old women who are best friends that solve mysteries, and it is about that, but it's also about so much more. One of those women was actually the bride of Frankenstein, which I didn't realize until at least halfway through, because I'm pretty sure that's something that was introduced in the first book and not really discussed until about halfway through the second book. And then her best friend is known for being in a long line of witches. There are other magical elements to this story, and it takes place in a very small town in the UK, and I really enjoyed it. I've asked my library to get the other volumes because why would you just have the second book in a series? Why? On to a different type of magic, because apparently I read a lot of fantasy this month. Didn't plan it that way. It just happened. I read Girls Made of Glass and Snow. This is a Snow White retelling, which I didn't realize when I picked it up. I think I just picked it at random from the audiobook app on my phone, started listening to it, and realized that's what it was, and was intrigued. This one is told in 2 perspectives, one from Mina and one from Linnet. Linnet is the Snow White character, and Mina is the evil stepmother queen character. We first meet Mina when she is a young girl, and then we also see her in Linnet's timeline when she is the queen, and then between those 2 perspectives we slowly fill in the intervening years. Something else I was not expecting but was very happy happened was Linnet has a queer love interest. I feel like I've said this a couple of times in this video, but I really enjoyed the magic system in this book. The description descriptions of the magic they were using and how the magic came to be, just yes, it worked for me. So if you want a queer Snow White retelling, here you go. And on to my 5-star reads this month, the first one being Certain Dark Things. This one is a vampire tale that takes place in Mexico. Which honestly, if that's not enough for you to pick this up, I don't know what's wrong with you. But in addition, it was pretty stinking good. So in this world, the human population found out in 1967 that vampires were a thing, and that there are different breeds of vampire. Mexico City is meant to be a vampire-free state. They have certain immigration laws and sanitation laws, and it's really hard for vampires to get in there, and yet there are at least a few vampires there. One of them is Adel, who is running from a different breed of vampire for reasons you find out while you're reading the book. She meets and sort of teams up with a young garbage collector from the city of Mexico, and the book switches perspectives between those characters as well as the vampire that is hunting her, as well as somebody who works for the vampire, as well as a police officer. It's dark, it's twisty, it is extremely bloody, as you would expect from a vampire tale. I really enjoyed the amount of lore and the amount of times that Domingo said, "But isn't this a thing that's real about vampires?" and her just being, "You read too many comics, kid." So if you want a vampire tale that isn't your usual Eastern European vampire story, definitely pick this one up. And then my favorite read of the month was Muse of Nightmares, which is the follow-up to Strange the Dreamer. I'm so happy it came out this month because I read Strange the Dreamer last month, not knowing that it wasn't a standalone book and that it had a sequel coming out. So I had questions, obviously, at the end of that book that needed to be resolved, and they were resolved very well in this sequel. Obviously, there's not too much I can say about this one, given it's the second in a duology, but the first one starts out with Laszlo Strange, an orphan who has an interesting life and an obsession with a city that seems to have vanished from people's memories. I also really enjoy these because I am a sucker for bookish books, and Laszlo ends up working as a librarian. He also at one point gets a book of fairy tales that hits him in the nose and breaks his nose. It's actually a prominent feature of his face when he's described that he has a crooked nose because of fairy tales. This might be disjointed and the light might have changed because somebody started vacuuming outside my door, so I don't know exactly where I was besides halfway through talking about Muse of Nightmares. I think the point I mostly just wanted to make is I understand that some people find it very, very slow paced and can't really get into the world. I'm not that type of person because, like I said, I'm a sucker for anything bookish. I love bookish books, I love stories, I love the kind of magic that's in this. I really enjoyed it. If you want to hear me talk more about these books or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always listed down in the description below. If you've read any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!